jack-o'-lantern, a werewolf, and a vampire walk into a circus, and all hell breaks loose in Savage Halloween. Is mowing down monsters a fun time for two? Savage Halloween looks pretty sweet, making good use of classic console-style graphics. Thematically, I'm not the biggest fan of the pairing of Halloween creatures and machine guns in a Contra-style shooter, but the environments, the variety of enemies, and some of the more interesting ammo types come close to creating that slightly spooky atmosphere you might associate with Halloween. Although a lot of the enemies and obstacles appear to be simply color-swapped versions of each other, it does a decent job of giving each level a unique look.
Savage Halloween is a 2D run-and-gun platformer in the vein of classic NES games like Contra. From the main menu, you can choose to start at the beginning of any level that you've unlocked, and we'll start with 3 lives and 3 continues. Each level essentially has 3 stages. The first stage is the basic run-and-gun with platforming. Platforming feels a bit imprecise thanks to an overuse of overhead obstacles, which get in the way, and repeated challenges in jumping between floating ladders that are often difficult to grab. The ability to double jump gives you more of a chance to avoid traps or land in the right spot, but platforms sometimes stretch the limit of how far you can get, even on a double jump, leading to short moments of frustration when trying to make a simple jump. This is exacerbated in co-op, where it's often necessary to time jumps together for both players to be able to reach a platform, or risk one player dying. On the other end, quite often you're forced to drop from a high ledge without knowing where you'll land, and sometimes you'll land directly in front of an attacking enemy with no way to avoid damage.
Despite the annoyances, most of the platforming is straightforward, and most of the enemies don't offer much of a challenge. Unlike some similar games that require quick reaction, the platforming segments here often reward patience and planning. The second type of stage is where a lot of the gameplay variety comes in. Here you're treated to scrolling challenges in the form of vehicle obstacle courses and shoot-'em-up gauntlets, or needing to outrun the threat of instant death. The variety effectively shakes up the gameplay, but these stages often felt repetitive and overlong, or came with a sudden difficulty spike. Consistently, these were the hardest part of every level, due to the shift in emphasizing quick reflexes and the increase in enemy numbers and instant death obstacles. They start out fun, but drag on to the point that when you finish them, you're relieved to be up against the relatively easier boss fights. Boss fights are hit or miss. They look great, but they're generally simple, and go down pretty easy. It's kind of a relief in situations where you might have used up all your continues just to get here, but it's a shame you won't have much time to appreciate their design.
Outside of a few one-hit kill scenarios, like falling off the screen or being crushed during side-scrolling segments, your character can take a fair amount of damage before dying, and there are occasional health pickups and even extra lives if you take advantage of the limited exploring available. There are 5 different ammo types that you can cycle through once you pick them up, each with unique abilities, and they're all fun to use. Firing a large frog that slides across the floor until it hits an enemy is delightful. There's decent enemy variety, with a couple of new enemies unique to each stage, which might require different strategies. But basic enemies are defeated with little effort. They don't respawn and they won't be running at you out of nowhere, so you often have the opportunity to plan your attack. You're likely to take more damage from the environment. Platforming is generally more challenging than the combat, but except for the occasional unforgiving timed level, the game doesn't feel too difficult.
The emphasis on platforming creates some frustrating complications when playing co-op. The worst of it is falling off the screen means instant death, which can happen when one player moves more quickly than the other, or when both players are making tricky jumps. In single player, falling usually means simply landing on a lower platform, but co-op turns imprecise platforming into a repeated death sentence, especially if either player isn't very good at platforming challenges. The platform-heavy first stages of each level include multiple instances requiring you to drop far to progress, meaning in co-op, you have to time your jumps to keep both players alive. This wouldn't be a problem if the game didn't limit the amount of continues, but once you're out of lives, you're out of the game, making the rest of the level single player unless you choose to restart. Fortunately, the slower pace of the game makes timing jumps more viable, and you're usually free to overcome platforming challenges at whatever speed is comfortable. But this isn't the case in some of the more challenging segments, like a circus level, where you have to outrun a fuse with projectiles and enemies slowing you down every step of the way. Co-op actually makes some areas significantly more difficult, as the risk and rate of instant death increases, and time is lost backtracking whenever you or your partner respawns. Thankfully, the co-op and solo modes share progress, so any level that seems impossible to finish together, one player can finish on their own to unlock the next level. But drop in, drop out would have made this possible without keeping player 2 out of the game for an entire level.
The lives lost to platforming are partially balanced by the damage saved in combat. Taking out enemies is easier and faster with 2 players, and even boss fights are over shortly after they begin. Although this makes some encounters seem trivial, it's appreciated in the moments where the game throws a lot of enemies at you. Later levels introduce more enemies that appear on the top of the screen, either firing projectiles at the player or dropping down to blow them up. These are often difficult or impossible to see in co-op, where player 2's HUD covers up that corner of the screen. Despite how natural it seems for this genre of game to include co-op, many of the features make it clear that the game was not initially designed for co-op. Although some stages feel overlong, each level can be completed in about 15 to 30 minutes, so the game is decent for short sessions. After completing a level, the next one is unlocked in the main menu, so your progress is essentially saved between levels, but not between stages. Be sure you've defeated the boss before exiting the game, or you might have to replay the entire level. Outside of gameplay, we appreciated that we could choose between 3 different characters, and even choose from a variety of color schemes to differentiate ourselves if we wanted to choose the same character.
The game begins with a series of dialogue boxes to tell a very simple story of monsters who come out of a portal once a year to have a party, and one vampire closing the portal so the party continues indefinitely. The 3 playable characters make a plan to open the portal again. It's not really clear why they want to, or why they have to fight through multiple levels of monsters to do it, and there's no further dialogue between levels to provide more context, so don't expect much story from Savage Halloween. The game never crashed, but we ran into a couple weird bugs in one level. These moving platforms would trap us behind them, which required us to mash the jump button to slowly inch our way out. In the same level, the game noticeably slowed down to a point even the music seemed to be in slow motion. Neither of these impeded our progress for too long.
Savage Halloween is an enjoyably average game. The art and music are great, and it really did feel like we were playing a classic game, in a good way. There are a decent variety of spooky motifs, but we thought a game with Halloween in the title could have leaned more into the visuals and feel of the holiday itself, rather than focusing on a horror theme. Co-op play is mixed. Although combat is easier in co-op, everything else is significantly harder, especially in later levels when it introduces bouncing. Co-op would be much improved if the life system were removed entirely, or the game had a drop-in/drop-out feature. If you're up for the challenge with a partner or interested in a retro run and gun, we'd give this one a soft recommend.